So welcome everybody. This is the SharePoint for Business webcast series, and today we'll be talking about using SharePoint as a collaboration platform. One of the big goals here is to figure out whether or not we can use SharePoint to host other applications and consolidate in that fashion. Just as a quick background, to let you know who I am. My name is Keith Long. I head up the Microsoft practice here at Ironworks Consulting. We have been around since about 2001. We've got a little over 250 employees. That number seems to keep changing every day. We've got offices mostly on the East Coast in Richmond, Washington, Raleigh, Charlotte, Atlanta, and Minneapolis. So Minneapolis, we're kind of moving a little bit towards the west. We have industry focus around healthcare, government, non-for-profit, and financial services. Our general sort of approach is to be a project-based consulting company. And what that means is we tend not to do as much staff augmentation and things of that sort. We really want to sort of take an identified scope of work and deliver it against a budget and a timeline, and we sort of take that risk on. Within that sort of frame of reference, we do primarily focus in those industries we talked about, but then also across some different sort of business goals, and that's enterprise content management and portal integration, which is largely what we're going to be talking about today. We've been doing that pretty much since we started, and we work with all the major content management systems. So today we're talking about SharePoint for the most part, but we actually do a lot of work on other systems as well. We also do a fair amount of work in business intelligence on the Microsoft stack, as well as interwoven or business objects and Oracle and a couple of others. So the last major areas that we work on are project management and consulting, and we've actually got a fairly large PMO group that goes out mostly in the healthcare industry, but really across the board, and will help set up a PMO and manage projects to completion. The other area that we talk about a lot is really our interactive capabilities, and we've started developing more of an agency approach. And the nice thing about that, especially with SharePoint, is that it really drives sort of that user acceptance and their ability to leverage SharePoint as a platform in a way that they're familiar with, and sort of improve that usability of the site. Major differentiators are the rates. We've got senior resources. We tend not to hire people right out of school, so they're not learning on your dime. And we've got a lot of loyal clients. Our retention rate is really high. It's over 80%, and from that perspective, it really gives us that long-term value that allows us to stay with people and have repeat work, and it helps us from a delivery perspective as well. So enough of the commercial. Let's start talking about what we're here for. And just to give you a quick background of myself, I've been in the sort of IT industry for a little over 15 years, about 8 years with Ironworks. From a SharePoint perspective, I started out with SharePoint 2001, so I've seen this evolve from a tiny little team collaborative tool that really wasn't all that great in the enterprise, but served a purpose, up to today where it's certainly capable of meeting the enterprise needs. I've done development, I do architecture work, done a fair amount of integration with different line of business systems, have some experience with commerce server, reporting services, business intelligence stack, and things like that. So what we're going to try and cover today is a little bit less technical than some of the other webcasts that we've done in this series. Our real goal here is to try and answer a number of different questions. SharePoint over the years has tried to sort of play above its head and usually gets knocked down by the industry, if you will, and I think it's really starting to come into its own, and so we really want to try and answer the question of, can SharePoint play in the enterprise and be that consolidation platform to allow us to drive some cost savings, improve user productivity, and all those other things that we really want to try and deliver to the business. So in order to get there, one of the first things we want to do is talk a little bit about how we got here, really look at the current state, why we arrived where we are, and not so much just to set the stage, but also because I think that history is important to understand how we can solve some of those problems going forward. Once we do that, we want to look at some of the typical challenges that IT is trying to solve for business. Usually this is what's driving a lot of the decision making, and historically it's what caused us to get into the problems that we have now, where we have 3 content management platforms and things like that. Usually it's because IT can't respond fast enough and things like that. So we want to try and look at what are those challenges, and then take a look at how SharePoint itself can actually meet those needs. So the first little while here that we're going to talk is really going to be pretty much not about SharePoint. It's going to be about the current state of the industry and how we sort of move forward. We'll spend a little bit of time talking specifically about SharePoint, where the platform is today, how it can address some of those needs and challenges that IT is commonly being asked to solve. And then we're going to take a look at sort of the industry perspective on whether or not SharePoint is actually ready to do this stuff. Hopefully by that point, we've talked about a lot of the capabilities and platforms, and that question isn't as murky as it might seem. And then we'll go a little bit into where do we start today, and we've sort of developed an approach that works well for us, and we've had some success with a number of our different clients, and sort of how you can try and address this in a really method-driven approach that is sort of safe and provides that accountability and visibility up to the C-level people that really want to understand how we're going to get from here to there and why it's valuable, so it doesn't have we'll also touch on a few best practices in terms of really at a high level business sort of drivers as to how to make sure SharePoint is going to be implemented properly and we can avoid some of those major pitfalls that a lot of organizations have already fallen into. Certainly Microsoft has driven this out into the enterprise, and they almost give it away with some of their enterprise agreements that are out there. But really one of the things we want to look at is if they have implemented it, let's try and leverage it and things like that. So let's look at some of the best practices that we can use to try and avoid those pitfalls, or if you already have it, maybe we can take some steps to remedy those issues. So the history behind the change. I apologize a little bit. I had a really cool flash demo that I just couldn't quite get working, so you're going to see a few technical things here, just for word-heavy slides, and then we'll get into a little bit more of a graphical scenario. But so the first bit of conversation we want to look at is taking an organization that's, in your Fortune 500. It's been around for 8, 9, 10 years, a little bit longer than that maybe. They've got a lot of different systems. Organizations like that have grown from a moderate-sized organization into a pretty large organization. Maybe they've acquired different companies, they've grown different business units, things like that. So we're trying to look at that type of scenario from a long-term perspective. Those organizations usually in that first year, second year, when they've started to get big enough, corporate IT is going to add some content management system. They basically realize that static website that they've been using for a while is really becoming a problem for them. They've got a bottleneck with IT, whatever it might be. So they go out and they decide, let's implement content management. Maybe they do it for their public website. They had maybe a microsite or two. The problem with this is really not evident in year one because it meets that very specific need. We need a public website. The communications or marketing group needs to get information out on the web pretty rapidly. And so they want that content management platform. Along with that, though, IT has to acquire a bunch of people to help maintain this site, or they have to sort of retrain their existing people. So now we've bottled up a group of people. We've deployed some infrastructure that's supporting that application platform. We've got a long-term investment basically is made to support this infrastructure. We then go on to years 2 and 3, and you'll start to see this become a pattern. And we say, okay, a different division has now been acquired. We've rolled out another set of products. So this new division goes out and says, hey, we need a new microsite. The current platform can't handle it. We're a couple years away from that one. The capabilities of the systems, even if we bought best of breed in year 1, maybe they're not able to handle a second website. They can't handle the creative capabilities that we're looking for. They're missing some features. Other times it's simply a matter of the division has enough autonomy because they're driving enough revenue that they say, you know what, IT can't respond fast enough. We're going to stand this new website up and we're going to use a brand new content management system. Whatever the reason is, this seems to happen on a fairly regular basis. And so they say, we're going to get this new content management system. We're going to deliver this new microsite. And one of the features that's missing is we need better search capability. So they go out and acquire a search appliance. Maybe it's Google appliance, maybe it's something else that they looked at. It could even be best of breed at the time, and if we're thinking back a few years, it might have been a precursor to Endeca or Idle or even some of the bolt-ons to SharePoint. Who knows what it was, but they bought this appliance that they're using. Along with this comes a number of infrastructure components that people have to acquire. New personnel, and we can't really re-leverage the existing personnel because they're still doing their day job, maintaining that first website. We've added some long-term investment to this, so again, you've got that tail pushing out further where you've got to actually maintain this equipment to actually realize that return on investment. And usually this is starting to set the stage for that split between either multiple IT divisions or corporate and the IT of a different business unit, whatever it might be. So it's starting to create that contentious nature that ends up going long-term when you get these large organizations. Year 4 and 5, same kind of scenario. So Division Y is going to go out, third microsite. Maybe they need a partner extranet. So again, we're adding a new piece of functionality that's going to drive them to say, current platform doesn't meet our needs. Let's go build a full-on portal to be able to handle both a microsite as well as an extranet. Again, you get more people, you get new personnel. Year 6 and 7, same kind of thing. So we're walking through this as it builds out. We're getting more and more people. We have collaboration, so we've added some new functionality. And if you're thinking historically, this sort of backs up to somewhere around 2006-07 when collaboration was starting to come on a lot of different organizations, not just with Microsoft. Everyone was thinking, how do we do collaboration better? Interwoven was pushing some products. Microsoft had their capabilities. TeamSite was out there. So a lot of people were pushing for collaboration, realizing the value of that. You started seeing more capabilities there. They say, hey, we want a portal. You had Logic. You had all these other platforms that were starting to say, hey, we've got capabilities here. The old ones couldn't quite do it. Plumtree was plugging along. All those different things were moving. So they said, hey, let's go buy another platform. This will give us better document management capabilities. So maybe we've got FileNet, we've got Documentum, we've got something that's handling TeamSite, things of that sort. This, again, adds new personnel, new infrastructure, and it really starts driving a much more complicated environment and infrastructure. We go to year 8, we're getting a lot closer to current state, and business intelligence is popping up, and people are really looking at, okay, we've got all these different information systems that are out there, data is dispersed, we need to find a way to start aggregating and being able to unlock that information so we can make some decisions. If you've got a mixed world where you're not just doing internal websites, you also have public websites, you're starting to look at Web 2.0, mobile issues, social media, analytics, all these other capabilities are starting to pop up that we need to start addressing. And so individual platforms get acquired and rolled out to deliver each one of these. Before you know it, you get essentially an infrastructure that's looking like this. And it's, the way we were talking about it, and I apologize, I didn't have the animation working, but, pretty much from the left-hand column there to the right, each year or 2 years successively, we added on another sort of fifth of this slide. And they're not necessarily bad business decisions because at the time the technology didn't support it. It was really hard to try and say, let's just upgrade this platform and see if it can meet the needs of these things. Business tends to move a little more rapidly than a lot of the platforms were able to do. It's not to say Microsoft was ready because they certainly weren't back in the day to do those types of things either. This is really just the state of affairs for a lot of organizations. We stop to look where we are today, and if you look across here, there's pretty much a consistent thread where we've got multiple platforms, web content management, search, portal. You might even have multiple portal platforms out there. We recently ran into a energy company that ended up consolidating their portal, their web content management, document management, digital asset management, and 2 other web content management platforms all into one SharePoint environment. You can obviously just, on the surface, that sounds like a much better approach. How they got there was mostly through acquisition of other companies. And so it wasn't anything that they made a decision about. Their competitors just happened to be using other platforms. So over time, this is going to happen. And that's part of the business case that I think a lot of people need to keep in mind as they're going back to the business, to the C-suite and saying, hey, we think this is justifiable expense to try and consolidate all these existing systems down. A, it's going to save us a lot of cost, and we'll get into some of the details there, but it's also going to make us more able to respond to new needs that you might have as a business, changing features and functionality that need to be delivered to end users. If we have a single platform, we become much more able to respond in a rapid fashion. So this current state is obviously fairly untenable. It's what drives a lot of the perception that IT is sort of a cost center. You've got lots of different systems. You can't really undo it because you have business owners that are saying, no, you can't shut down my system because it's part of how I drive value for their organization. And so it perpetuates that cycle. So the real trick is how do we actually prove the business case to justify collapsing multiple systems into one so that we can actually drive better value for their organization going down the road. So obviously this scenario, long and the short of it, this is sort of the money slide for this section, is it's obviously the highest cost of ownership and the least agile. So it really creates a lot of problems for people. The way we've kind of summarized this for other people, and this is a little bullet heavy, but the common thing is you end up with site sprawl. And this comes out from a lot of different places, and I, just having been in IT for a good part of my career, I don't like to point this back to IT. I think it's just a lot of things come to bear on it, but certainly there are a number of things that do pop up into the situation that can cause these things. One of the most common ones is lack of standards and governance. Organizations try to implement standards, they try to implement governance, but at the end of the day, those things really take a lot of effort, and it's really difficult for organizations to do it because it costs money. Over time, it ends up becoming realized, and people see why that was a problem that they didn't get that governance put into place. But it's something that ultimately is going to drive a bigger problem. If you look at internet site architectures, this can be something that the platform may support, but because of the way they've implemented it, it's creating problems for users. And this is a fairly common thing that we've seen, even in a number of organizations where they're big enough that they've got two different business units that have implemented the same technology, and they implemented one, and one group loves it, and the other group absolutely hates it. And so that implementation and how we set up that architecture, how we set up that governance model, how we chose to implement it for the users, whether it's training, communication, et cetera, those can cause problems. So that user experience on top of the existing platform can be a problem as well. Other things that are a little bit softer around that site sprawl, loss of brand identity, ownership, lack of governance, we talked about that one, and content duplication. These are things that are obviously tied to governance, but they're also sometimes tied back to the technology. Some of the older technologies that are out there have a hard time doing that. You've got to get third-party products to help with it, or it could just be how you implemented it. The other thing that is the big one that I think we're really trying to hit on most prominently here is technology sprawl. And this really does come out of a number of different things. Sometimes it's the contention between two different business units that have their own IT organizations. Sometimes it's from acquisition of customers. In other cases, we've actually seen this come out of a strategy that was very well thought out, and historically, I think a lot of organizations thought this was a very good approach. But I think there's an angle of governance around the best-of-breed selection that can cause problems. And what we've seen with some people that have said the best-of-breed approach is a good way to go is, on the surface and without thinking over a 5 or 10 year period, it is good because you're going to get the right technology to do exactly what you want. It's going to deliver the best solution for a customer, for an internal user, for whoever it might be. The problem is, over time, if you keep taking the best-of-breed approach, you end up never being able to leverage your existing platforms, and you're constantly having to say the best-of-breed is the new thing. So when somebody says, I need a new feature, well, best-of-breed approach, this is the company mantra. We're going to go out, we're going to get best-of-breed. What do we have today? Well, we have a platform that we implemented 2.5 years ago. Well, that's not best-of-breed, so let's implement the new platform. So now we've got 2 platforms. 2 more years later, what's the best-of-breed? Well, it's neither of those, so let's get a third one. So over time, the best-of-breed approach, if you don't have the right cost structures in place and the right company that you acquired in the initial place, where maybe they're doing upgrades on a regular basis, things of that sort, best-of-breed really can become problematic. And so I think you need to find a slightly more hybrid approach to say, let's use a framework that is going to get us 80-20, and then for very niche solutions, then best-of-breed that bolts on top of it can work well. But over time, it ends up driving high license costs, really complex integration. That diagram we just had up a minute ago sort of illustrates the complexity of a best-of-breed solution. People are buying each technology every year. You end up with a much more complicated change and enhancement model. So your release management process ends up becoming much more complex. You may have a theoretical deployment model or release management model, but you have to adapt it to each one of those different technologies. And so, as a consultant, we're all taught, You want to talk in generalities. You want to give them the themes and the methodology that allows it to work on any platform. But the reality is, as an organization, internally, you have to translate that into very specific activities that people have to do. And when you look across 7 different systems, they're all doing similar things. Each one of them, while it's following the same methodology, they've all got very specific activities, which means people have to be tied to that knowledge base. Documentation expands exponentially almost. It becomes a much more complicated thing to maintain, and it's much more complex to actually ensure that you maintain that availability, deployment capability, things of that sort. So we've talked about pretty much the rest of these things. I think one thing in here that we didn't cover too much is that support cost. And I think there's obviously the license and the maintenance cost, but there's that internal support cost. And this is not just on the IT side, and it's a little bit overlooked by a lot of organizations. One of the things that we find sort of consistently when you talk to the end users is they are constantly struggling to remember exactly how to do whatever it is they want to do. There are multiple systems, so training costs end up getting higher. You also end up driving up help desk costs. So you've got IT maintenance costs, you got end user productivity, because they're trying to figure out today, how do I do my job? Once they figure that out, a new system gets rolled out, and now they've got multiple systems they have to deal with. And then you've got help desk support costs end up getting driven up as well, because you've got multiple systems, they forget how to do it. Unless you've rolled out a really great tool for self-service, well, now help desk is going to get in the mix so that they can answer those questions and help people through their day. And these are obviously at the macro level. Certainly you can implement this successfully, but generally speaking, these are the types of things we're seeing. The other big thing that obviously comes out is functional limitations. It's a lot harder to personalize content just historically. Certainly those capabilities are coming out now, but plugging that in just leads to the same type of infrastructure sprawl we were talking about. BI is popping up now largely, at least in part, because multiple systems have that information. It's sort of locked up in lots of different places. So BI and search, I think it's really interesting to watch how that's unfolding for the organization as a whole. I think BI is very data-driven, search is much more context and text-driven, but the two are starting to come together, and you're starting to see that unfold in the marketplace as well. So you've got the same type of thing that's happening on that side. A lot of it is driven from this sprawl of infrastructure, sprawl of technology that we need to deal with. That obviously created a whole bunch of integration tool sets that are out there, but again, that just adds to that complexity. So what we want to try and do is take a look at, if we talk about that's what we're hearing, let's turn this into the types of things that the business really wants us to be able to do, talk a little bit about how SharePoint can address it, and then look at the platform and see if it really does actually shake out to be able to meet those types of needs. So from a high-level perspective, I'm going to walk through these, and I'll try to go relatively quickly, just because I think there's some other things through the rest of this that are probably more important. But really, we want to set the stage and make sure we're all thinking about this in the same way. And from a business perspective, I think reducing cost is one of the highest drivers that's out there, especially if you're in a large organization. You've got lots of different systems at play. You have a number of different drivers that are pushing your costs up, and you really want to find a way to try and drive that down. We'll walk through each of those. We want to look at agility. We want to look at security. That seems to be much more common concern as of late. Operational control, and I roll this up under, there are a number of items that fall under this category. And then you've obviously, especially nowadays, brand and user experience is really becoming top of mind for a lot of organizations, especially on the business side. IT has typically not been one to push this, but it's also part of the reason that a lot of different business units have taken it away from IT, used their own budget, and outsourced these projects to other organizations. Sometimes that's a good approach, sometimes it's not, but the need to maintain that brand and deal with user experience with new functionality like social media is driving that, and if we can find a platform that can meet those needs, it would be great. And obviously functionality for users. So just as a really quick walkthrough, the big drivers that we see on cost reduction, platform consolidation obviously can meet that need. It should be fairly apparent how that works. If I can shut down a document management system that's got a maintenance fee, if I can shut down a digital asset management and roll it all into one collaboration platform like SharePoint or some other platform, well, now I have one license model to deal with, one maintenance scenario to deal with. I can shut down a bunch of servers, do some physical consolidation, things like that. I also, from a technical perspective, I can actually reduce the number of integrations that I have to do. So tying those systems together becomes simpler because I have one platform that's tying back to 4 fulfillment systems or 4 supply chain systems. So it's a lot faster for me to do. one system talking to 4 line of business systems instead of 3. I've reduced the amount of code that I have to manage for that integration. User productivity should go up, which also reduce costs. If they're more productive, they can do other things, or they can be tasked to do other things. Operational awareness is the other big thing. A lot of times organizations with multiple systems, it's hard to keep track of what systems are about to fail. If we have fewer systems, we can implement better tracking systems to actually watch it, which helps reduce our costs. Anytime those systems fail, we have to go into a crisis mode, put people on overtime, we have to fire up disaster recovery environments, whatever it might be, our costs go up. So if we have better awareness of our system, we have better awareness of our data, whether it's on the fulfillment, the supply chain, et cetera, that awareness of our environment can help drive those costs down as well. The other place that I think from a cost perspective we want to look at and sort of ask our question, can SharePoint do this, is the technical skill perspective. As you get multiple systems that are out there running each one of these platforms, we've got to have technicians that are able to add custom code to it, deploy it, put service packs, whatever it might be. They have to develop those skills and maintain them over time. If I have 5 different systems, I either have to have 5 sets of people, or each person has to be a bit more of a rock star, and now I've got to actually pay them a whole lot more to have them manage all those systems. Either way, those costs go a lot higher. If we can consolidate down to one platform, something like SharePoint, we know that over time their skills are going to converge. It reduces the number of systems they have to manage and maintain. We can leverage that overall platform that we probably have in place with Office. They can be leveraged to manage those types of development efforts as well. And so our technical skill capability costs should come down over time as well. Increased agility. So one of the big questions we're always looking for is how can we as an IT organization become more agile, actually respond to the needs of the business faster. If I have 5 platforms, it's hard to do that. The deployment model is difficult. I've got a much more rigorous testing approach that I have to go through to make sure when I roll this functionality out, it doesn't break everything else that's out there. One platform helps manage that. I become much more agile. Getting there can take time, but once we are there, life can be a lot easier. We also have the ability, if we have a core platform in place, we can actually go out and buy third-party products that, if that platform vendor has provided a certification to say, we roll that product onto the SharePoint, we know that it's going to be stable even when we do an upgrade to SharePoint, whether it's a service pack, a major release, whatever it is, we know that they're going to be compliant with that future upgrade. So we're baking into this process the ability to add functionality more rapidly now without the risk of tying ourselves into a platform that isn't going to be around later, or we couldn't decouple it later if we need to because there's something better. And that's where vendor integration comes in. We want to make sure that whatever platform we have is really very capable as a platform to integrate with other products that are out there. Not just simple bolt-ons to extend the functionality, but really to actually provide supply chain capability, delivery capability, partner integration, things like that. We want it to be a framework so that our developers have the ability to integrate with these other systems in a better way and on a more reliable long-term way. And that's where sort of having that loosely coupled environment that a lot of people talk about from service-oriented architectures, things like that, comes into play. So making sure you have a really robust, stable API and service layer drive those capabilities. Feature development, we want to look at reduced platform complexity, standardization and optimization. All these things come with time. Making sure that platform can meet those needs will allow us to do that. Operational control. So one of the other things, and this is sort of one of those dirty little secrets that a lot of organizations don't like to talk about, how do we keep the lights on? We want to be able to do that in a simple fashion as possible. SharePoint delivers this through things like System Center. They have a best practice analyzer. They've got better reporting tools, et cetera. To pull it away from SharePoint, this is a standard issue that all IT organizations have to deal with. How do we do that? How do we make sure that we have visibility on the system that when they go down, we can either automatically try and recover from it without involving IT, which helps drive costs down, reduces downtime, which also keeps costs down. Things like that, we want to make sure that the platform we select can deal with that. So operational control is one of those key tenets to making sure that our platform will work for us in a long-term perspective. We've got some other things around security and performance optimization that we want to look at. They're not as tied to cost, but they are tied to that sort of business value and perception of the organization, being able to meet the needs of business. And so from a security perspective, a lot of organizations, and we'll talk about this in a second, are starting to be asked to deliver on SOX and other compliance issues, making sure that that organization, those systems are truly secure, and that we have the ability to report against those things to say, hey, this user accessed this content on this date, et cetera. And so we can respond to legal requests, we can respond to compliance audits, things of that sort. The operational control of the environment is critical to the success of the IT operation being able to meet those business demands. Information security. So from here, we want to start looking at, can the system meet all of these basic needs? Do we have granular access control? Do we have audit compliance capabilities? And it's not just SOX. HIPAA, the federal government has a lot of different things, DoD compliance levels, policy enforcement. You may have legal issues that you're trying to deal with. We want to be able to do that in a clean and easy fashion to make sure that when somebody does say, hey, I need to figure out when this document was read by all my employees, the standard HR type policy issues that we want to deal with. Federated authentication. This starts getting down into the weeds a little bit from a technical perspective, but really it's part of the goal. We are finding that trading partners are now wanting to let their trading partners manage their user accounts on their own, and so those users don't have to have a user account with their trading partners. So we need to have this federated authentication, which is like SSO, single sign-on, OpenID, a bunch of the standards that are out there, industry standards are coming to fruition, and we're actually starting to be able to leverage it, which is a really good thing. But we want to make sure our platforms support that. We want operational security. We want to know that the platform itself is secure, that it can meet the needs of PCI and actually go out and conduct e-commerce and all those other fun things. Developer security tools, so that as we're building custom code, we know that our developers can actually sit there and walk through it and say, yes, this is secure. And so we can build into our development lifecycle a security development lifecycle, so we're checking it from design all the way through the testing and UAT to make sure that whatever we roll out into production is secure and meets those needs. And of course, reporting. It wouldn't be security if we couldn't pull up a report and say who has access to what, when did they access what. Creative design and user experience is the other one that used to get short shrift, especially in the Microsoft world. It was really difficult in 2003, if not impossible, and in 2007 it got a lot better. In 2010, we have the ability to meet most of these needs from a brand control and user experience perspective. But those marketing groups, those communications groups, they are starting to drive, especially for any site that lives outside the firewall that our customers, our end users are really accessing. They really want to make sure they can control that experience to the nth degree, and you need a platform that can meet those needs. Certainly SharePoint historically doesn't have the best reputation on that. I think that's changing, and as we get a little further in here, we can talk about how that's happening. But really, you need a platform that can meet those needs, and that's one of the places where I think that infrastructure sprawl happened. Communications groups would get together with IT and say, can you do this? And IT wouldn't have a good answer for it. So they go out and they talk to an agency, and the agency would say, hey, we got a platform here. We'll do it on Flash. We'll do it on this. And so they roll out their solution, and that's great. It works, but then it's a very point solution. They're now tied into an outside vendor. IT doesn't have control. They get upset, and long-term you have this sort of contention between the two groups. We want to try and put in place a platform that can actually answer the needs of the communications group and deliver on those things, so that not just Web 2.0, social, mobile, et cetera, even the stuff with games that are starting to come out where we're advertising through games and bingo and all those types of things. But what's next? There's going to be another thing that's driving our market needs, how people are talking to our customers. We don't know what it is yet. I'm sure there's some prognosticator out there that's going to come up with it, but I don't know what it is, but I can figure out how to build a platform that I think is going to be extensible enough to answer those needs down the road.
We've received a question.
Sure.
Could you clarify, please, how federated authentication differs from typical authentication?
Sure.
And if you could repeat the question, please.
Yeah, so I guess the question popped up, and now is a good time to talk about it. Somebody was asking about federated authentication and how that differs from your typical authentication models. So in a typical authentication scenario, we're going to use something like Active Directory on the back end. We might use SQL. We might use LDAP. Application is going to directly talk to that authentication repository. In a federated scenario, that platform is going to be able to talk to those same back-end authentication systems, but it'll also be able to go talk to a trading partner, OpenID, whoever it might be, to identify who that user is. So we've separated out in a very clear way the difference between identifying who you are and identifying what you're allowed to do. So federated authentication lets users be identified by non-corporate entities. So my organization isn't going to be able to say you are who you say you are. I'm going to talk to OpenID, I'm going to talk to Google, I'm going to talk to whoever. It's going to verify your username and password, and then I'm going to choose, are you allowed to do certain things within the system? So I still retain control of authorization, but authentication now gets federated to a number of different platforms. Yeah. All right, so let's keep going, because I think we're going to be aware of time here and give some time for other questions. Brand control, I think we covered that. Functionality for the users. This is, and I'm going to avoid talking about the wheel, but this is kind of where the wheel comes in from the Microsoft world. Really, we want to be able to deliver all this extra functionality. We're looking about findability, improved efficiency of process automation, integrated self-service. So we don't want IT involved when somebody says, hey, I need a new team site to do X, Y, or Z. We want content reuse. We don't want to have somebody create that press release and copy and paste it 4 times so that we get a different format or different presentation. We want to use that same content, have the different look and feel of the 4 different microsites that we have, but it's the same press release. Let's give a tool that can do that. Obviously, we're making the argument that SharePoint can do that. We want some drive towards cultural cohesion. And I think this is really about the social networking aspects that are starting to come inside the firewall. And everybody's familiar with Facebook and Twitter, and Yammer is starting to pop up, and Foursquare and everything else that's out there. How do we leverage that inside the firewall to actually drive business benefit? I think a lot of people were nervous about bringing social networking inside the firewall because they're afraid people would just be chatting and wouldn't actually be productive. Where there's actually some productivity benefits to letting people comment on content and identifying subject matter experts in different ways. And so it's really a matter of using those new concepts that have developed in sort of the consumer world inside the firewall in ways that become relevant and actually increase productivity. Granted, there are things that the IT organization and the compliance and HR groups want to be mindful of, but I think there's a balance that can be struck, and there are a lot of tools like NewsGator and SharePoint itself that can meet those needs. So let's take a look at SharePoint itself, and this is where we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts. SharePoint as the portal. Let's sort of answer that question. Can it do it? Obviously, we're making the case that it can. I think historically it's been trouble to do that. The goal here with 2010 is to let it be sort of that front door. Treat it like a true portal. A lot of times, historically, we viewed SharePoint essentially as a collaboration tool, and that was it. Well, now we want to actually let it be that central tool, treat it as a framework. Yes, it has lots of capabilities across the board that can help with certain key functionality, but if we treat it more as a portal that happens to have some functionality, we can let it be that window that all the users point to. It's tied directly into their existing Office applications like Word and Excel, and so they're used to it and they're familiar with how it works. But we're going to bubble up content and functionality from other applications directly through it. So if it becomes that central point of access, we want to provide them the ability to get to their benefits, to HR, to payroll, to training, careers, et cetera. So these are obviously things that SharePoint doesn't do, but it can be that window to get to them. SharePoint's got some features called business connectivity services that's going to let you do that very quickly. You can obviously write custom code to get there. And for a lot of these types of things, our third-party connectors have already been developed. So it becomes that framework where they go to the SharePoint portal, they log in, they do whatever they need to do, and then they click on HR, and now they've got their 401k benefits, where they've got access to a form that lets them submit a vacation request form, things like that, see how much PTO they have coming. We want to look at search. Search is one of those things that we are in the age of Google, and we're a Microsoft partner, so they hate it when people say that, but that's the reality. Google still wins. It's how people sort of perceive things. Certainly Bing is coming along, but in the corporate world, that kind of doesn't matter. So what we want to do is take that experience that they're familiar with and that desire to say, hey, I can always go out to a search engine, type in these words, and I'm going to find what I want to find. Well, Google's not all that great when it comes behind the firewall. They're trying. But inside the firewall, we want to try and find a way to tie in the ability to find people, documents, applications, video, photos, data in line of business systems, press releases, your typical web content, and make sure that that's easily accessible through a search tool that they're familiar with. Microsoft and SharePoint and FAST have really sort of taken that next step. When they acquired FAST about a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was, that kind of took them pretty close to best of breed. They were struggling on their own. There were a lot of bolt-ons, but I think with FAST, which was sort of a competitor to the likes of Endeca and Autonomy and IDLE and things like that, they've really sort of upped their game a lot and can tie in all those back-end systems. They can do it efficiently, very fast. They can load lots of content, hundreds of millions of documents, and still provide that user experience that's very customizable so you can design it to look the way you want it to look. We also want to look at collaboration. It's still the core component of SharePoint. It's really what drove its wildfire adoption. Everybody grabbed onto it because it did collaboration just that well. Nobody else could really provide that experience that tied in Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint into a collaborative environment where you could do offline type of functionality. I could do real-time edits with my partners, so if I'm typing, they can see that typing. Things like that were really quick for them. Social, I think, is where they've still got some weakness. It's coming along, obviously. They've added a lot of things that weren't there before, and if you look at some of the things in Gartner, they're in the leader quadrant. They're just not the best at it. So they're certainly not a leader here, but they've got ratings and tags and favorites and comments and forums and wikis and blogs and, run it on down the list. And certainly there are other people that have built bolt-ons that take it to that next level. But even out of the box, it's got a lot of strong capability. From a content perspective, we've added a lot of capability here. Really, especially on the sort of public-facing website, it's gained a lot of credibility in recent years. And so while it can do all the stuff that you think in terms of press releases and lists and libraries and document management, version control, and everything around that, we now have a single platform that can reasonably address the needs of an intranet, an extranet, and a public website on the Internet. And so you can have that single farm, still have very diverse and segmented content from a security perspective, which gives us that manageability, but it can meet all the needs of these different constituent audiences and therefore the different business units. Tools and applications, this is really some of the under the hood thing, but it's also for the end users. We want to be able to develop applications. We want the ability to manage the tool set that's out there. We want different browser support to be able to look through the organization. I want to find who reports to who and things like that. And I just brought up browser support, which is a little bit out of context, but it does support all the major browsers. There is no sort of tier 2 browser anymore. It has chat, calendaring, things like that. So that's kind of the high level. This is just a slightly different way of looking at it, and I'm going to try and wrap this up fairly quickly here. But if you look at the top line, these are a lot of the capabilities that SharePoint sort of brings to the table. You've got sites that let you manage everything else, social, from a ratings and profile, the content management, the search capability with relevance, insights, synergies. Microsoft call it composites. We're still struggling with a better word because nobody knows what composites are. We'll come up with something better there. It's more of your mashup, that type of thing. What I think is useful to know from an IT perspective is everything below the line. So we've kind of talked about the top line stuff. On the bottom, this is really where you get a lot of that capability. The out-of-the-box integration with Office 2010, with line of business systems from the BCS, media asset management, other tools that are out there is a huge value from a platform perspective that actually makes it enterprise ready. Application development has come leaps and bounds. So it's now at the point where not only is it based on .NET, which in and of itself is a great selling point. There's so many people that know .NET. There are a ton of developers out there. The open source community is huge for .NET and SharePoint. Lots of third-party add-ons. But they've also baked into their own tool set within Visual Studio 2010 deployment methods, packaging tools, things like that we used to have to go out to third parties to be able to build our own applications reliably and consistently. We now have baked into the tool set, and that's a much improved advancement that makes it a lot more capable. Obviously, you've got collaboration and communication. Again, and I was a little bit conflicted as whether or not I put link and exchange over on the integration side, but I think communication is kind of its own standalone silo, so it's worth pulling out off to the side. Most organizations have Exchange. A lot of them are starting to roll out Link, or they've got Office Communicator. This gives you presence awareness and the ability to do live chats and whiteboards and live meetings things like that directly from SharePoint, highly integrated. So from an industry perspective, this is really that high-level view of, is this thing really stable? Are we ready to be in the enterprise? Can we meet the needs of the organization? And I looked at this in a couple of different ways, and I just pulled out Gartner, but it's starting to be the point where you can locate a lot of the different organizations, CIO Magazine, CMS Watch, Forrester, all the others are starting to come to similar conclusions. So just taking this one by one, Gartner has one of their magic quadrants called the horizontal portal. And this is the first year that Microsoft has actually led the leaders quadrant. So they're out in front of IBM and Oracle, and by Gartner's definition, they're the best horizontal portal out there, which is largely what we're talking about here. The other thing that I look at from Gartner, which I think is almost more compelling, they have a set of magic quadrants that they call the super collaboration productivity. It used to be 11, it's now 20. It kind of goes through an evolving period as they release different magic quadrants. But you can sort of see the list of the ones that fall into that. Each one of those, Microsoft is in the leader quadrant of all 20 of them. They are, I think, the only one, last time I heard. Other organizations have lots of them, but Microsoft is actually in the leader quadrant in all of them. They are certainly not the leader in all of them. They are in the horizontal portals. But that gives you a sense of the depth of the platform that historically wasn't there. And this is a relatively new distinction that they can say they're in the leaders quadrant of all 20 of these. And if you look through it, even in social media and enterprise content management, which is more your public-facing web type thing, BI, data warehousing, all these other things that sort of drive productivity or collaboration, being out in front is a pretty big distinction. And I'll pull out just one quote here from a cost perspective, because I think it's a good way to sum up whether or not the industry is buying into this. A big energy company, and I think they're in Baltimore, Maryland, was recently quoted as saying, we're going to save over $1 million by combining their portal, the document management collaboration systems into SharePoint 2010. And certainly, that's not going to be realized in 6 months, but from the case study that I was reading, it's relatively small time periods, about 18 to 24 months. So to pull that kind of ROI just in licensing is significant from a platform perspective, and they're certainly not the only organization that's saying that type of thing. So where do we start? And we'll roll through this really quickly because I do want to leave some time for questions, and I think we're getting down to the last few minutes. We kind of look at this from a typical consultant view, but I think you can do this internally on your own as well. And it's the standard assessment and planning. But I think one of the first things to really keep in mind is how do we handle this from case? And I think if you look at it and say, we want to do a platform consolidation, that's great, but a lot of times you've got to take that back to a steering committee, to the C-suite, and say, is this justified? And so our first step is really to actually say, let's justify the platform consolidation argument and see if we can come up with a good ROI and justification behind it. In order to get to that business case, we look at it and say, what are the goals and objectives? And you really don't want to focus just on the IT organization. We want to broaden that out. In order to do that, we got to talk to a number of different constituents. We go look at the current state. That diagram I had early on that showed 35 different systems, lots of people, everything else, you want to actually build that diagram. And believe it or not, that picture is critical to the success of the business case. Documents and the ROI number is huge, but you put a picture like that in front of the C-suite and say, this is what we're managing to run our business. The eyes pop open and they go, really? We had no idea. And it's just, you start explaining why, and the lights come on and the wheels start turning, and it makes it a lot easier to justify the business case. So we go through that part of it. We want to look at a high-level scoping effort to say, okay, here's where we are today, here's where we want to be, what's it going to take to get there? That becomes your business case. And I just basically ran through this, so I'm going to skip over it, but it's really how do we get to that business case? Certainly the last piece that I'll tack onto it that I didn't have before is the program management. And I think for a project like this in particular, because it is going to span multiple business units, it's going to span multiple technologies, you really need program management, not just project management. They have to be aware of all the different systems that are going to come in play, all the different users that are going to get involved, and make sure they have good program management to keep all those different threads on track. The other piece, once you do that, is really more of a matter of execution. Develop the roadmap and walk through it from start to finish and get to where you need to be so that you can roll this out and be successful from that perspective. we did a fairly hypothetical cost savings, but it's fairly typical, and it's based on a couple of different clients that we've used, and really it's pretty impressive when you look at somebody that's got of content management systems. And over about a 3-year period, you're getting to $2.25 million in savings pretty quickly. And so that's kind of a nice thing to see that. And so I'm going to leave the best practices up there and just try and get to a few questions because I know we're down to the last couple of minutes. So I'm going to ask Charlene to read off a few questions for me.
Okay, we did actually, we have a multi-part question here that I wanted to start with, asking if Office 2007 is still supported. Quick answer.
Yeah, the quick answer is yes. There certainly are some deprecated features associated with it. Just like any Microsoft product, they've added new stuff into Microsoft Word 2010 as opposed to Word 2007. You can do all of the SharePoint functionality is still there, but there are certain things that Word 2010 does that Word 2007 doesn't. The ability to see taxonomies that are hierarchical in nature, you can't do that in 2007. But a lot of the other collaborative features are still there.
Okay. And then continuing the question is, what is search for with video and images? Is it video and images, metadata, and where is that information stored?
Sure. So search is kind of an interesting thing with SharePoint. It can actually, it will obviously search the metadata. So for any known image or video file type, it will search that metadata. And when it searches that metadata, it actually is looking at the data within the document itself. Additionally, SharePoint allows you to create custom taxonomies, custom metadata. So when you upload that image, that video file, whatever it is, you can apply a lot of other metadata to help search find that content better. The ability to actually look inside the image and do OCR, that's not out of the box. There are some eye filters, is what they're called, for things like AutoCAD and other image tools that it allows it to reach in and actually search for text within images. There's some other third parties that go one step further and will do OCR against images and scan documents and things of that sort, and then that content can be searched as well. And I think the last part of it was where is it stored. Natively, SharePoint stores that content in SQL, and so I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, that can't work. My video file is, 50 gig or whatever it might be. Well, it also now supports the ability to store content on the file system as opposed to inside of SQL. So the metadata will always be, the custom metadata will always be within SQL as part of the SharePoint solution, but then you have a choice to move some of that stuff onto the file system if it's justified based on the size or the different activities that you're trying to accomplish.
We do have another question. Does SharePoint 2010 Enterprise include chat functionality out of the box, or is that a third-party add-on?
So that's one of those fun questions that Microsoft does things a little bit differently than everybody else. SharePoint itself doesn't have a chat functionality, but if you implement Link or Office Communication Server, then it does. So it depends on how you want to call, is it, out of the box. It's not part of the SharePoint package, so when I've done product selections and things like that, we typically say no. You look at other vendors like Oracle and so forth, they'll consider that out of the box. It's a separate module. So within the Microsoft family, there is a module that you can implement. You don't have to write custom code or anything like that that gives you chat functionality. On the flip side, the more conventional way of doing this, especially for public websites, is to actually go out and get a third-party tool and implement that and tie that into SharePoint to give you that chat functionality. Do you want to take one more? Sure. Okay. How does SharePoint compare to other portal platforms for a consolidation effort like this? Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question. I think, certainly there are other portal platforms that are moving in this direction. The argument I would make is that, Microsoft started this process back when they went from 2003 to 2007. At that point, they had a different content management platform, and they had content management server 2002, and then they had SharePoint. Business intelligence was sort of in its infancy. They have started moving that all together, and so I think they've got a longer lead time over some of the other competitors. Certainly, Oracle and IBM both have competing plays. my argument would be that Oracle has done it through acquisition, and they haven't quite figured that story out. They've got multiple web content management systems all under the same roof, and depending on which sales representative from Oracle you talk to, you will get a different answer as to which one you should use today. Microsoft's story is a little bit more consistent. It used to not be the case, but I think now that they're at 2010, they've gotten a much more consistent theme. They still have problems like search. They brought fast into the story, and I think it's there, and if you talk to the right people, you'll get a good story from them. But the reality is fast just came under the fold, a year and a half ago. They barely had time to get it into 2010, so there's still a little bit of question, should I use the out-of-the-box search? Should I use fast? Which one does which one does different? And that sort of delta there is a common problem with Oracle. IBM is in a slightly different position, but it's certainly there. So I would argue that it's a little further down the road, and that's one of the reasons we think it's a better play, but the other tools are certainly capable of doing it as well. Any more?
We've got one more, okay. And then I think we'll be up and need to wrap things up. Do you know of anything similar to Cisco Unified Personnel Communicator for SharePoint, something that shows employee status, screen sharing, and chat? That's a big one.
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with that Cisco product, but the stuff that you listed there are all very familiar to me in terms of what Lync provides. Microsoft used to have a product that was called Office Communicator, and it was Office Communication Server, and it had a bolt-on thing, or not a bolt-on, it was a deployment you had to do to the desktop. And so Lync is sort of the next evolution of that, and that allows people, when they log into their laptop, or they log into the site, or they log into the communicator tool that they can install on their desktop, it passes that information back to Active Directory, which then bubbles up through SharePoint, and so it gives you that presence awareness. And so SharePoint and Lync together give you the bulk of the features that you were just asking about within SharePoint. And I think that's about it. So I will thank you all for coming, and we will get this posted to our site. So if you want to provide a link to somebody else, or if you've got other questions, we certainly appreciate it. And we will talk to you next time. Thanks for coming, everyone.